CEO helps twins save their mother. You won't believe what happens next. Welcome to Stories TH. In today's heartwarming story, we witness a life-changing encounter between a successful CEO and two twin brothers desperate to save their mother. Their act of kindness not only changes the course of their lives, but also touches the heart of a business tycoon. If you love stories that inspire and move you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more heartwarming moments like this one. In the bustling heart of Central Park, the autumn wind stirred the air as twin brothers, Zach and Lucas Wilson, sat huddled together on a worn bench. The chill of the morning had settled in, but their minds were focused on something far more urgent than the weather. Between them rested a cherished red toy car, worn at the edges but still gleaming brightly in the sunlight. This toy car, once a symbol of their carefree childhood, had become their lifeline. With their mother lying pale and weak in their small, run-down apartment, the twins knew they needed money for her medication money they didn't have. They hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, but the hunger gnawing at their stomachs was secondary to the more pressing need to get their mother the help she so desperately required. "Someone's out to want it," Zach whispered, nervously twisting the car in his hands. His words were full of hope, tinged with the weight of their desperation. Lucas, his identical twin, scanned the passing crowd with solemn blue eyes, his stomach rumbling but his determination unwavering. The world around them seemed oblivious to their struggle as businesspeople rushed past without even noticing the twins' silent plea. The boys had set themselves up in the hopes of catching the attention of anyone who might be willing to buy the car, but their efforts had been futile. People walked by, some offering pitying glances, others pretending not to see them at all. The twins' only goal was to get the money they needed to save their mother. Their situation seemed hopeless until a man walking through the park noticed them. Blake Harrison, the CEO of a global technology empire, was focused on his own busy schedule when a small voice broke through his thoughts. "Excuse me, sir. Would you buy our car? It's really special," Zach called out, holding out the toy car with all the earnestness he could muster. Blake's stride faltered. Something about the twins' sincerity stopped him in his tracks. The two young boys, no older than 10, stood before him with identical faces pinched with anxiety, their small hands gripping the toy car like it was a treasure. In that moment, Blake saw something in their eyes that resonated with him deeply. Perhaps it was the weight of their desperation, or perhaps it was the way they treated that toy car, as if it held more than just sentimental value. Without fully understanding why, Blake reached into his wallet and handed them several large bills, far more than they had expected. The twins' eyes widened in disbelief, and Zach carefully placed the toy car into Blake's hand, his fingers lingering for a moment before reluctantly pulling away. "Thank you, sir," Lucas said, his voice trembling with relief. "This will help our mom a lot." Blake watched as the boys gripped the money tightly and hurried away, and for a moment, he debated returning to his day, forgetting about the encounter. But something inside him tugged at his heartstrings. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something significant, something that would change everything. The twins' faces, so full of need and hope, lingered in his mind. Without a second thought, he instructed his driver to follow them. "I want to see where they live," Blake said, surprising even himself with the words. As Blake's car trailed behind the boys, he stared at the toy car now resting in his hand. He had spent years building his empire, surrounded by wealth and power, but it had been a long time since anything had made him feel this way. He didn't believe in fate or coincidence, but as he watched the twins make their way to a run-down apartment building in one of the city's forgotten neighborhoods, Blake felt as though his carefully structured life was about to be irrevocably altered. The contrast between his sleek car and the crumbling building where the boys disappeared was stark, and Blake found himself sitting motionless, the toy car still in his hand, contemplating the deep sense of connection he now felt toward these strangers. Stepping out of his car, Blake climbed 4 flights of stairs, following the sounds of children's voices until he reached a door with peeling paint. The boy opened it, his eyes wide with confusion, but without hesitation, Blake stepped inside. The apartment was small but clean, and what struck Blake most was what was missing. There were no luxuries, No comforts, just the bare necessities. Behind them lay their mother, Catherine, frail and pale, too weak to sit up. It was clear she had been suffering for weeks, and when Blake learned that they could not afford her treatment, something inside him stirred. With no hesitation, he promised to take care of it. He gently lifted Catherine into his arms and carried her down the stairs into his waiting car. "Where are we going?" Lucas asked, holding his mother's limp hand. "To people who can help her," Blake answered, already dialing the hospital to arrange for immediate care. Blake had spent years building emotional walls, focusing solely on his business empire. Yet, something about these boys and their desperate situation had breached those defenses. As Blake watched them in the back seat, their worried faces reflecting both fear and relief, he realized that his life was no longer the same. The emergency room doors slid open, and Blake carried Catherine inside, his presence cutting through the usual waiting procedures. Within minutes, doctors were examining her, and Blake found himself making all the necessary arrangements to ensure she received the best care available. As hours passed and Catherine was stabilized, Blake was faced with a question he hadn't considered. What happens after? The twins, who had been so strong in the face of adversity, needed stability, and Blake couldn't bear the thought of sending them back to their dilapidated apartment. "Come stay with me," he found himself saying, not fully realizing what he was offering until the words left his mouth. The twins hesitated, unsure of what to expect, but Blake assured them that they were welcome. His mansion, once an empty symbol of his success, was now about to be filled with the sounds of children, laughter, and life again. Over the following weeks, Blake found himself growing closer to the twins, teaching them chess, watching them play sports, and even sharing meals together. The change in him was undeniable. His once isolated world, dominated by work and the pursuit of profit, was now filled with the warmth of family. And as Blake sat down to dinner with the twins and their mother, he realized something profound. His life had been forever changed by a simple act of kindness. The toy car, which had once represented the boys' desperate attempt to save their mother, had transformed into the symbol of a second chance for Blake to heal, to love, and to build a family he never thought he would have. In the end, it wasn't just charity. It was life. And Blake Harrison, the CEO who had once defined himself by his empire, had found something far more valuable than business success. He had found family, love, and a reason to truly live again. In the heart of New York City's Central Park, twin brothers Zach and Lucas Wilson sat huddled on a worn bench, their faces reflecting a mixture of determination and desperation. The autumn wind swirled around them as they clutched a cherished toy car between them, its once glossy red surface now faded and scratched from years of use. Despite its wear and tear, the car was still their most prized possession. It was their only hope to save their mother, Catherine, who lay sick and fragile in their small, cramped apartment. They hadn't eaten properly in days, their stomachs empty and growling, but they couldn't focus on food. Their mother needed medication urgently, and they had no way of affording it. Their only option was to sell the toy car, a decision that weighed heavily on them. "Someone's got to want it," Zach whispered, his hands nervously twisting the car. His words, though quiet, held a sense of resolve. Lucas nodded, though his voice wavered with uncertainty as he scanned the passing crowd for a potential buyer. His stomach rumbled, but he ignored it. They hadn't eaten since yesterday's meager breakfast, and hunger gnawed at them both. But even hunger couldn't overpower the need to get their mother the help she desperately needed. "Let's try over there," Lucas suggested, pointing toward a busier part of the park where people were rushing to work. The twins positioned themselves along the well-traveled path, summoning every ounce of courage in their 10-year-old hearts. They were facing a world that seemed to rush by without taking notice of their plight. Despite their innocent desperation, people hurried past them, some offering pitying glances, others not even acknowledging their presence. It seemed as if no one cared. Their hearts sank, but they pushed forward, their identical blue eyes searching for anyone who might take a moment to stop. "Excuse me, sir," Zach called out to a man in an expensive suit who was walking briskly past them. "Would you like to buy our car? It's really special." The man didn't even slow his pace, and without a second thought, continued on his way, leaving the boys to stand in the wake of his indifference. The pattern repeated throughout the morning, people rushing past without a second glance, consumed by their own busy lives. It seemed hopeless. "We need to try harder," Lucas said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom needs a medicine today." The twins, though exhausted and hungry, refused to give up. And then, out of the corner of his eye, Blake Harrison, a successful 42-year-old CEO, emerged from a sleek black car, his sharp suit reflecting his position in the corporate world. Known for his focus on business and his calculated decision-making, Blake wasn't the type of man to notice much beyond his own agenda. But something in the twins' voices, a desperate sincerity, caught his attention as he passed. "Excuse me, sir," Zach called again. "Would you buy our car, please?" Blake's stride faltered, the rawness in the twins' voices compelling him to stop. He turned and saw the two boys standing there, identical faces pinched with anxiety, holding out the car with a tenderness that made Blake pause. Something about their earnestness, about the way they treated the car, as if it were a priceless treasure, struck a chord in him. "How much?" Blake heard himself ask, unable to explain why the question had slipped out. The boys exchanged a glance, their hope rising. "Whatever you can pay," Lucas said, his voice breaking. "We just need it for our mom. She's really sick." Blake's gaze lingered on the toy car. It was worn but clean, a clear sign of how much the boys valued it. Without fully understanding why, Blake reached for his wallet and removed several large bills. He extended the money to the boys, offering more than they had hoped for. Zach's eyes widened in disbelief as he carefully placed the car into Blake's palm, his small fingers lingering for a moment before pulling away. "Thank you, sir," Lucas said, his voice trembling with relief. "This will help our mom so much." Blake watched as the boys hurried off, clutching the money with all the hope they could muster. He should have returned to his day, to his meetings and his meticulously planned life, but something nagged at him. He found himself watching the twins as they walked away, their heads bent together in urgent conversation. Without really thinking, Blake turned to his driver. "Follow them," he said, surprising himself with the command. "I want to see where they live." As Blake's car followed the twins through the city, he stared at the toy car, now resting in his hand. It had been years since anything had disrupted his life, since he had felt anything beyond the confines of his business empire. And yet, something about these boys, their situation, and their quiet resilience stirred something deep within him. His life, which had been carefully isolated from emotion and human connection, had just become entwined with theirs. When Blake's car eventually followed the boys to a run-down apartment building in one of the city's forgotten neighborhoods, the contrast between his sleek vehicle and the crumbling building was stark. As the twins disappeared inside, Blake sat motionless in the car, the toy car still in his hand, feeling an inexplicable pull. He had spent his entire life building walls, focusing on business and personal success, avoiding the pain of his past. Yet, as he watched those two boys, he realized that something profound had just happened, something that would change everything. Blake climbed the stairs to the apartment, his heart heavy with a feeling he hadn't known in years. He saw Catherine, their mother, frail and pale, her condition far worse than he had expected. Blake made the decision without hesitation. He would help. Blake took Catherine to the hospital, arranging for her immediate care and authorizing treatment without a second thought. For the first time in years, Blake felt something stir within him. His world, once defined by the pursuit of profit and success, had been turned upside down by two children trying to save their mother. The experience would mark a turning point in Blake's life, and he would never be the same. As Catherine's health improved, Blake found himself growing closer to the family. Despite his carefully constructed isolation, the warmth of their connection began to change him. The mansion he had once called home was now filled with laughter and life. And as he spent time with the twins, teaching them games and sharing meals, he realized that the family he had never expected had become everything to him. For the first time, Blake allowed himself to feel something deeper than business success: love compassion, and the unspoken promise of second chances. In the heart of New York City's Central Park, twin brothers Zach and Lucas Wilson sat on a weathered bench, clutching a red toy car between them. The autumn wind swirled around them, rustling the dried leaves that dotted the ground, but they barely noticed. Their focus was entirely on the small toy car. They were trying to sell, a treasured possession that had seen better days. Zach nervously fiddled with the car, turning it in his hands as he whispered, "Someone's got to want it." His voice was full of desperation, though he tried to keep it steady. His twin brother, Lucas, nodded, but his face was etched with worry as his stomach rumbled. The boys hadn't eaten properly in days. Still, their hunger paled in comparison to their urgent need to raise money for their mother, Catherine, who was gravely ill at their small apartment. She needed medicine immediately, and they had no way to afford it. The toy car was their only hope, but so far, their attempts to sell it had failed. People passed by without stopping, ignoring the twins' calls or offering only a fleeting glance of pity. The busy city around them was in full swing, with no one seeming to notice or care about the two young boys desperate to save their mother. "We can't give up," Lucas said, trying to rally his brother's spirits. "We need to try harder." As the morning wore on, the twins shifted their position, hoping for a better spot, a busier path where more people might notice them. Their identical blue eyes watched each passerby with growing hope, each one a potential lifeline to their mother's recovery. Just as their energy began to wane, a tall figure emerged from a sleek black car. Blake Harrison, a successful CEO known for his global technology empire, adjusted his suit jacket and started to walk through the park, lost in his thoughts about the day's business. At 42, Blake had built Harrison Industries into a formidable force, his name synonymous with power and success. His mind was preoccupied with work and the meetings that awaited him, but something about the twins' desperate plea cut through his thoughts. As he walked past, Zach called out to him, "Excuse me, sir, would you buy our car? It's really special." The words caught Blake off guard. He stopped, turning to face the boys, who looked up at him with eyes full of hope, their faces tense with anxiety. Zach extended the toy car toward Blake, speaking with a quiet but urgent voice. "It's really fast, and the door's even open," he said, trying to sell the car like it was a treasure. Something about the earnestness in the boys' faces made Blake pause. He hadn't expected to be moved by something so simple, but there was a sincerity in their plea that tugged at his heart. Blake, though usually reserved and focused on his business, felt a surprising tightness in his chest. He looked at the toy car, worn and well-loved, and without fully understanding why, found himself reaching into his wallet. He pulled out several large bills more than they could have hoped for and extended the money toward them. "Here," he said, his voice gentle. "Will this help?" The twins' eyes widened with surprise, and they exchanged a look of disbelief. Zach carefully placed the car into Blake's hand, his fingers lingering for a moment before reluctantly letting it go. "Thank you, sir," Lucas said, his voice trembling with relief. "This will help our mom a lot." Blake nodded, watching as the boys hurried away, clutching the money tightly in their small hands. He could have walked away, returned to his meetings, and never thought about the encounter again. But something about the whole interaction stayed with him. He found himself staring after the boys, their identical heads bent together in quiet conversation. He could feel a tug in his chest, a need to understand more about their lives, to know who they were and why they were in such desperate circumstances. Blake turned to his driver, who had been following discreetly. "Follow them," he instructed. "I want to see where they live." Blake's curiosity was piqued, and before he could second-guess himself, he found his car following the twins through the streets. The path led them to a crumbling apartment building in one of the city's forgotten neighborhoods. The contrast between Blake's sleek car and the dilapidated surroundings was jarring. As the twins disappeared into the building, Blake sat in the car, staring at the toy car in his hand, unable to shake the feeling that something important was happening, something that would change his life. Without fully understanding why, he stepped out of the car and followed the twins up the stairs. When he reached the apartment, he saw the door open slightly, revealing the twins standing in the doorway, their faces filled with confusion. Blake asked to come inside, and after a moment, they stepped aside, letting him in. The apartment was small, its sparse furnishings a testament to the family's limited resources. Catherine, their mother, lay on a thin mattress, her skin pale, her breathing labored. It was clear that she had been sick for weeks, unable to get the care she needed. "How long has she been like this?" Blake asked quietly. "Weeks," Zach answered, his voice small. "She gets worse every day." Blake knelt beside Catherine, his heart heavy with sympathy. He reached out, touching her fevered arm. "She needs a hospital," he said decisively. "We don't have money," Lucas replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's why we were selling our car." Blake's heart clenched as he looked at the toy car in his hand, and something inside him shifted. Without thinking, he said, "I'll take care of it. I'll make sure she gets the care she needs." Blake's decision was made in that moment. He lifted Catherine gently into his arms and carried her to his car, already dialing the hospital to arrange her care. He wasn't sure what compelled him to do it, but something about these boys, about their determination, their love for their mother, had broken through the walls he had carefully built around himself. As Blake watched the twins in the back seat, he realized his life had just taken a dramatic turn. It wasn't just business anymore. For the first time in years, he found himself caring deeply about something beyond his empire, about a family in need. This was just the beginning of a profound change in his life. In Central Park on a brisk autumn morning, twin brothers Zach and Lucas Wilson sat on a worn bench, their small hands gripping a treasured red toy car. It was their only hope, an object that symbolized their childhood, now turned into a desperate plea for help. Their mother, Catherine, lay sick and weak in their modest apartment, unable to afford the treatment she so desperately needed. The twins hadn't eaten properly in days, and their stomachs ached with hunger, but the need to get their mother medicine outweighed everything else. "Someone's out to want it," Zach whispered to Lucas, his fingers nervously turning the car, its edges worn from years of play. Lucas nodded in agreement, though his face was strained. He scanned the crowds walking through the park, their busy lives seemingly unaware of the twins' plight. The boys weren't asking for charity, they were trying to sell the toy car, something that meant so much to them, for any amount of money that could help save their mother. "We have to try harder," Lucas urged, his voice trembling. The twins had positioned themselves near the busiest part of the park, hoping someone might stop. They watched each person who passed by, desperately calling out to them. "Excuse me, sir, would you buy our car?" Zach asked a man in a suit, his voice full of sincerity. The man walked past without even acknowledging them. The pattern repeated all morning. People rushed by, some offering a pitying glance, others pretending not to see the two boys sitting in their desperation. The twins' hope began to fade. They hadn't expected an easy solution, but they hadn't anticipated such indifference either. As the crowd continued to flow by, Lucas whispered, "Mom needs the medicine today. We can't give up." Their voices cracked with the weight of their words, but they pressed on. Then, through the bustling crowd, a tall figure emerged, a well-dressed man in his early 40s, striding confidently through the park. Blake Harrison, the CEO of a global technology company, was deep in thought, mentally preparing for his meetings ahead. He was a man defined by his business success, his every move calculated, his focus unwavering. But as Blake walked past the twins, he heard their plea. "Excuse me, sir, would you buy our car?" Zach's voice pierced through his thoughts. Something about the sincerity in their voices, the desperation in their eyes, made Blake stop. He turned to face the boys, noticing how carefully they were holding the toy car, as if it were a precious artifact. It was clear that the car meant more to them than just a toy. It was their last hope, their only way of saving their mother. Blake hesitated, something stirring inside him that he hadn't felt in years. He had spent so long focusing on business and success that he had neglected the emotional side of life. But these two boys, with their earnest plea and their undying love for their mother, made something inside him crack. "How much?" Blake asked, his voice softer than he intended. The twins looked at each other, their faces filled with uncertainty. "Whatever you can pay," Lucas replied, his voice shaking. "We just need it for our mom." She's really sick. Blake's gaze lingered on the toy car. It was old, clearly well-loved, but still shining in the sunlight. The fingerprints on it were a testament to the countless hours the boys had spent playing with it. Without fully understanding why, Blake reached into his wallet and removed several large bills, extending them to the twins. "Here," he said, his voice steady. "Will this help?" The twins stared at the money in disbelief, their eyes wide. They had never hoped for this much. Zach carefully handed over the toy car, his small fingers lingering for just a moment before letting it go. "Thank you, sir," Lucas said, his voice full of relief. "This will help our mom a lot." Blake nodded, his eyes following the twins as they hurried away, the money clutched tightly in their hands. He could have turned back to his meetings, to the life he had carefully constructed. But something about the encounter stayed with him. He watched the twins retreat, heads bent together in quiet conversation, and a feeling of unease stirred within him. His life, so meticulously planned and isolated, had just been interrupted by two young boys. Unable to shake the feeling that something significant had happened, Blake instructed his driver to follow them. "I want to see where they live," he said, surprising even himself with his words. As Blake's car trailed behind the boys, he couldn't help but feel a connection to them. His gaze drifted to the toy car in his hand, and he realized that this simple object, this small piece of their childhood, had triggered a profound change in him. It had been years since anything had disrupted his carefully guarded life. Blake's car followed the boys to a rundown apartment building, its cracked windows and peeling paint stark against the sleek luxury of his own vehicle. As the twins disappeared inside, Blake sat still in the back seat, contemplating what had brought him here. The life he had built, filled with wealth and success, suddenly seemed empty compared to the simple, genuine love that these boys shared. Blake climbed the stairs to their apartment, his heart heavy with a sense of purpose he hadn't expected. When he knocked on the door, one of the boys opened it, and Blake was greeted by the sight of their small, sparse home. In the corner of the room lay their mother, Catherine, lying on a thin mattress, her face pale and frail. The sight of her, so weak and vulnerable, hit Blake harder than he expected. "How long has she been like this?" Blake asked quietly. "Weeks," Zach answered, his voice small. "She gets worse every day." Blake's resolve solidified in that moment. He looked at the toy car in his hand, then at the twins, and without hesitation, he said, "I'll take care of it. I'll get her the treatment she needs." The boys exchanged a glance, unsure of how to respond. "But how will we pay you back?" Zach asked. Blake smiled softly. "You already sold me your car," he said. "Now it's my turn to help." Without waiting for their response, Blake carefully lifted Catherine into his arms and carried her down the stairs, with the twins following closely behind. As Blake loaded them into his car, he knew that this was just the beginning of a profound change in his life. His world had just collided with theirs, and he couldn't turn away. The family he never expected was about to transform his entire existence. Blake's decision to help them would reshape his future, one small act of kindness at a time. In the bustling Central Park, on a crisp autumn morning, twin brothers Zach and Lucas Wilson sat huddled together on a weathered bench. Between them rested a small, red toy car, its edges worn but still gleaming in the sunlight. It wasn't just a toy, it was their last chance to save their mother, Catherine, who lay sick in their tiny apartment. The twins hadn't eaten properly in days, their stomachs rumbling with hunger, but that wasn't their priority. They needed money for their mom's medication, and they had no way to get it. Desperation and hope mixed in their young hearts as Zach nervously turned the car in his hands, whispering, "Someone's got to want it." Lucas, his identical twin, nodded, though his blue eyes were filled with worry. They had positioned themselves along a busy path in the park, hoping that someone might stop, someone who could help. But the world around them rushed by, indifferent to their plight. Business people hurried to work, their minds occupied with their own lives, while the twins' silent desperation went unnoticed. "We've got to try harder," Lucas said quietly. His voice broke with emotion as he glanced at the passing crowd. They had been trying to sell the toy car for hours, but no one had even stopped to ask. Still, they didn't give up. They couldn't afford to. The small toy car, though weathered, was all they had left to sell. Their mother's condition was worsening, and if they didn't get the money for her medicine soon, there might be no chance left. As the morning dragged on, their spirits began to falter. That's when Blake Harrison, a powerful CEO, walked by. At 42, Blake had built Harrison Industries into a global technology empire. He was known for his business acumen and sharp focus. But today, as he walked through Central Park, his mind was preoccupied with meetings and quarterly projections. He barely noticed the twins until Zach's small voice called out, "Excuse me, sir, would you buy our car? It's really special." Blake stopped in his tracks, momentarily distracted from his thoughts. He turned to face the twins, who were holding the car out with an intensity that surprised him. Something about the urgency in their voices, the way they treated the toy car as if it were something priceless, made Blake pause. He saw the clear desperation in their eyes, but there was also a raw sincerity, one that he couldn't ignore. Blake's heart stirred unexpectedly, and before he could stop himself, he asked, "How much?" The twins exchanged a quick glance, uncertainty written on their faces. "Whatever you can pay," Lucas said quietly. "We just need the money for our mom. She's really sick." Blake's eyes lingered on the toy car. It was old, clearly loved, and the small fingerprints on its surface told the story of countless hours spent in play. Without thinking twice, Blake reached into his wallet and pulled out several large bills more than they could have imagined. "Here," he said, offering them the money. "Will this help?" The boys' eyes widened in disbelief. They hadn't expected anything close to this amount. Zach carefully placed the car into Blake's hand, his small fingers lingering for a moment before pulling away. "Thank you, sir," Lucas said, his voice trembling with relief. "This will help our mom a lot." Blake watched them hurry off, clutching the money in their small hands. He could have gone back to his meetings, continued with his busy day, and forgotten about the interaction. But something about it stayed with him. The twins' faces, so full of hope and anxiety, stayed in his mind. He found himself watching their retreating figures, those identical heads bent together in quiet conversation. Blake turned to his driver, who had been trailing at a discreet distance. "Follow them," he said, surprising himself with the command. "I want to see where they live." Blake's curiosity, driven by something deeper than logic, led him to follow the twins as they made their way through the city. His car trailed behind them until they arrived at a rundown apartment building in one of the city's forgotten neighborhoods. The contrast between his sleek, expensive car and the dilapidated surroundings couldn't have been starker. As the boys disappeared inside, Blake sat motionless in his car, the toy car still in his hand. He had spent years focusing on building his business, on creating an empire of wealth and success. But in that moment, the emptiness of it all seemed overwhelming. Something about these boys, their courage and their love for their mother, had awakened something inside him that he hadn't felt in years. Blake climbed the stairs of the building, his steps heavy with purpose. When he reached the door, one of the boys opened it, his eyes filled with confusion. Inside, Blake saw the small apartment, sparsely furnished and clean despite its condition. But what struck him most was the sight of Catherine, the boy's mother, lying on a thin mattress, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. She was clearly ill, and Blake immediately knew that something had to be done. "How long has she been like this?" Blake asked gently. "Weeks," Zach answered, his voice small. "She's getting worse every day." Blake knelt beside Catherine, reaching out to gently touch her arm. Her skin burned with fever, and it was clear that she needed medical care, immediate care. "She needs to go to the hospital," Blake said decisively. "We don't have money," Lucas said, his voice barely audible. "That's why we were selling our car." Blake's heart clenched as he looked at the toy car in his hand. He had everything: money, success, power, but in that moment, he realized that these two boys, their mother, had something far more precious, a deep love for each other. Without thinking, Blake stood up, his decision made. "I'll take care of it," he said firmly. "I'll get her the treatment she needs." Blake's mind was made up. He helped Catherine into his car and drove her to the hospital, where doctors immediately began working to stabilize her. It was the start of something Blake couldn't have anticipated. His life, once defined by business and isolation, was now intertwined with theirs. Over the coming weeks, Blake grew closer to the family. Despite his initial hesitations, he began to care deeply for the twins, teaching them games, sharing meals, and becoming part of their lives in a way he had never allowed himself to before. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. Blake's once isolated life was now filled with love, laughter, and the noise of children. He realized that by helping them, he had not only saved their mother, but had also given himself a second chance at happiness and connection. What started with a small red toy car had blossomed into something far more significant than Blake could have imagined: a family, and the chance to be something more than just a businessman. It was a gift he had never expected, and one that would change his life forever. On a crisp autumn morning in Central Park, twin brothers Zach and Lucas Wilson sat quietly on a worn bench, their eyes scanning the crowd as they clutched a small red toy car between them. The car, though faded and worn from years of use, was their most prized possession. It was all they had left to sell to help their mother, Catherine, who was gravely ill in their cramped, run-down apartment. Despite their hunger and exhaustion, the twins were focused entirely on raising money for their mother's much-needed medication. They hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, and their stomachs ached with hunger, but their desperation to save her outweighed all other concerns. Zach turned the toy car in his hands nervously, whispering, "Someone's got to want it." Lucas nodded in agreement, though his face was full of concern. "Let's try over there," he suggested, pointing to a busier path where more people were walking. The twins positioned themselves in a high-traffic area, hoping that someone would stop and listen to their plea. Their identical blue eyes were wide with anticipation, but as they watched the crowd, it was clear that no one was paying them any attention. "Excuse me, sir, would you buy our car?" Zach called out to a man in a sharp suit. The man didn't even slow down, ignoring them completely. It felt as if the world was moving on, unaware of their desperate situation. Despite their mounting frustration, the twins did not give up. They repositioned themselves, summoning all their courage, trying to keep their voices steady. "We need to try harder," Lucas said with quiet determination. They were determined to do whatever it took, but after hours of failed attempts, their hope began to fade. It seemed as though no one was willing to help them. As the morning wore on, Blake Harrison, a successful CEO of a global technology company, was walking through the park, focused on the upcoming meetings that awaited him. At 42, Blake had built Harrison Industries into a powerhouse of innovation, and he was known for his sharp business acumen. However, on this particular day, something happened that would change the course of his life. Blake had always been focused on his business empire, but as he walked through the park, his thoughts were interrupted by a small voice calling out, "Excuse me, sir, would you buy our car?" Zach's words caught his attention. For a moment, he didn't quite understand why he stopped, but there was a sincerity in the boys' voices that tugged at his heart. He turned to see the twins, holding out the car as though it were a treasure, their faces full of worry and hope. Something about their desperate situation touched Blake deeply. Without fully understanding why, he walked over to the boys, who were clutching the toy car with a reverence that was far beyond their years. "How much?" Blake asked, his voice softer than he intended. The twins exchanged a quick look. "Whatever you can pay," Lucas answered, his voice filled with emotion. "We just need the money for our mom. She's really sick." Blake's heart sank as he looked at the toy car. The fingerprints on it told a story of love, of a childhood spent with something that, to them, was precious. Without hesitation, Blake reached for his wallet and pulled out several large bills. He handed the money to the twins, far more than they had hoped for. "Here," he said. "Will this help?" Zach and Lucas looked at the money in disbelief. It was more than they could have imagined. "Thank you, sir," Lucas said, his voice trembling with relief. "This will help our mom a lot." As the boys hurried away, Blake stood there for a moment, staring after them. He should have returned to his business, to the meetings that filled his schedule, but something was pulling at him. He couldn't shake the image of the twins walking away, their identical heads bent together in conversation, clearly discussing what to do next. Without thinking, Blake turned to his driver. "Follow them," he instructed, surprising himself with the command. I want to see where they live. As Blake's car trailed the twins through the city, his thoughts began to shift. His carefully controlled life, built on success and financial gain, suddenly seemed empty in comparison to the simple love and determination these two boys were showing. Blake's life had always been isolated, focused entirely on business, but this encounter was different. There was something about these boys that made him realize how little he had truly connected with others. The car followed the twins to a rundown apartment building in a neighborhood Blake had never visited before. The contrast between his sleek, expensive vehicle and the crumbling surroundings couldn't have been more stark. As the twins disappeared inside, Blake sat motionless in the car, staring at the toy car in his hand. He had never expected to be pulled into something like this. Yet here he was, completely affected by their struggle. Blake climbed the stairs to the apartment, where he found the twins standing in the doorway, clearly surprised to see him. Inside, Blake saw the tiny, sparse apartment where Catherine lay on a thin mattress. She was pale, feverish, and weak, her condition far worse than Blake had anticipated. "How long has she been like this?" Blake asked softly. "Weeks," Zach replied, his voice heavy with worry. "She's getting worse every day." Blake knelt down beside Catherine, feeling the heat radiating from her body. "She needs to go to the hospital," he said firmly. "We don't have money for that," Lucas said, his voice small. "That's why we were selling our car." Blake's heart broke as he looked at the twins. They had no one else, no resources, and yet they were doing everything they could to save their mother. Something inside him stirred, and without thinking, he made a decision. "I'll take care of it," he said. "I'll get her the treatment she needs." Blake picked Catherine up gently, carrying her down the stairs to his car. As he drove to the hospital, he couldn't help but feel that this simple act of kindness was going to change everything. He had never anticipated such an emotional journey, but helping these two boys had become something far more important than just a charitable gesture. It was the beginning of Blake's personal transformation. By opening his heart to this family, Blake found a new sense of purpose, one that wasn't defined by wealth and success, but by the ability to make a real difference in the lives of others. As Blake spent more time with the twins and their mother, he realized that this unexpected act of kindness had become a turning point in his life. He had never known that love, compassion, and family could heal wounds so deeply buried in his own heart. On a chilly autumn morning in Central Park, twin brothers Zach and Lucas Wilson sat huddled together on a worn park bench, their small hands clutching a red toy car. The toy car, despite its weathered edges and fading color, was their last hope. The twins were desperate, having not eaten a proper meal in days. Their mother, Catherine, lay sick and weak in their small, dilapidated apartment, and they had no way to afford the medicine she desperately needed. The toy car, a symbol of their childhood, was all they had left to sell. "Someone's got to want it," Zach whispered, his voice quivering as he nervously turned the car over in his hands. Lucas nodded, scanning the passing crowd with wide eyes, his stomach growling, but the hunger was secondary to their need to raise money. The boys were 10 years old, but in that moment, they carried the weight of an entire family's survival on their small shoulders. They hadn't planned on spending the day like this, but when they realized there was no other way to help their mother, selling their prized possession was the only option they had. They watched the people pass by, business people rushing to work, joggers, tourists hoping someone would stop. "Excuse me, sir," Zach called out to a well-dressed man in a suit. "Would you buy our car? It's really special." But the man didn't even acknowledge them, walking past without a second glance. The twins exchanged a look, disappointment setting in, but they didn't give up. They needed to raise the money, and they were determined to do whatever it took. "We'll try harder," Lucas said, his voice breaking. "Mom needs the medicine today." Their plea was genuine, but it seemed like the busy world around them had no time for their desperation. Hours passed without success. No one stopped to buy their car. That was when Blake Harrison, a well-known CEO, entered their lives. Blake, at 42, had built Harrison Industries into a global empire. He was known for his sharp business acumen and unwavering focus on success. But on this particular day, as he walked through Central Park, something about the twins caught his attention. Blake, whose life was consumed by quarterly projections and meetings, was absorbed in his thoughts until a small voice cut through. "Excuse me, sir, would you buy our car, please?" It was Zach's voice, pleading and full of sincerity. Blake turned and saw the twin boys, their identical faces full of hope and worry, their eyes desperately searching for someone to help. The car, a simple toy, was held out with a reverence that Blake couldn't ignore. There was something in their earnestness that made him pause. Without fully understanding why, Blake walked over to them. "How much?" he asked, his voice softening. The twins exchanged a brief, uncertain look before Lucas replied, "Whatever you can pay. We just need it for our mom. She's really sick." Blake's gaze lingered on the toy car. It was clear that it had been well-loved, with little fingerprints marking its surface. The boys had clearly taken great care of it, despite its age. Blake reached into his wallet and pulled out several large bills. He didn't hesitate. "Here," he said, handing them the money. "Will this help?" The twins looked at the money, their eyes widening in disbelief. It was more than they had hoped for. Zach placed the toy car carefully into Blake's hand, his small fingers lingering before reluctantly pulling away. "Thank you, sir," Lucas said, his voice trembling with relief. "This will help our mom a lot." Blake nodded, watching as the twins hurried away, clutching the money tightly in their hands. He should have turned back to his busy schedule, but something about the encounter lingered. He couldn't shake the image of the twins walking away, their heads bent together in quiet conversation. Without fully understanding why, Blake turned to his driver and asked, "Follow them. I want to see where they live." As Blake's car slowly followed the twins through the city, he found himself questioning why he felt so compelled to help. His life had been all about wealth, success, and isolation. But now, for the first time, he felt drawn to something beyond business, something real, something human. The car followed the twins to a rundown apartment building in one of the city's forgotten neighborhoods. The contrast between Blake's sleek car and the crumbling building couldn't have been more stark. The boys disappeared inside, and Blake stayed in his car, the toy car still resting in his hand. It was a small, insignificant object to most people, but for Blake, it symbolized something far greater, a life that was empty, a life that needed to change. Blake climbed the stairs to the twins' apartment. The door opened slightly, and Blake was greeted by the boys, their faces a mix of confusion and surprise. Inside, Blake saw the apartment clean, but sparse. In the corner of the room lay their mother, Catherine, pale and weak on a thin mattress. "How long has she been like this?" Blake asked quietly. "Weeks," Zach replied. "She gets worse every day." Blake knelt beside Catherine, gently touching her arm. "She needs to go to the hospital," he said decisively. "We don't have money," Lucas replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Blake looked at the toy car in his hand, and then at the desperate faces of the twins. Something inside him stirred. "I'll take care of it," he said, surprising himself with the confidence in his voice. "I'll make sure she gets the care she needs." Without waiting for their response, Blake lifted Catherine into his arms and carried her down the stairs to his waiting car. As Blake drove the twins and their mother to the hospital, he felt the walls he had built around himself begin to crumble. For the first time in years, he realized he wasn't just helping a family in need. He was helping himself. The act of kindness he had offered was the beginning of a profound transformation. He had come to see that life wasn't just about money and success. It was about making a difference in the lives of others, about showing love and compassion when it was needed most. The twins and their mother had changed him in ways he never expected. And for the first time, Blake felt that his life had meaning beyond the confines of his empire. It was a crisp autumn morning in Central Park, the leaves rustling in the breeze as twin brothers Zach and Lucas Wilson sat together on a weather park bench. Between them rested a red toy car, its shiny surface now faded and worn with age, but still gleaming under the sunlight. The car was more than just a plaything, it was their last hope. They hadn't eaten a full meal in days, their stomachs aching with hunger, but the need to raise money for their mother's life-saving medication overshadowed everything else. Catherine, their mother, lay in their tiny, run-down apartment, weak and suffering, unable to afford the treatment she desperately needed. As the morning passed by and people hurried past them without giving them a second glance, Zach clutched the toy car tightly in his hands and whispered, "Someone's got to want it." Lucas nodded, his face full of concern as he scanned the crowd. His small hands shook slightly as he grasped the car, knowing how much it meant to both of them. "We have to try harder," Lucas urged, his voice cracking. The boys hadn't planned to spend their day this way, but when they realized there was no other option, selling their cherished toy car was the only way they could think of to help their mom. "Excuse me, sir," Zach called out to a businessman walking past them. "Would you buy our car? It's really special." But the man didn't even stop or acknowledge them. He simply walked past, absorbed in his own world. The twins exchanged a look of disappointment, but they didn't give up. They knew they had no other choice. They couldn't afford to let their mother suffer. "We'll try again," Lucas said, his voice determined. As the hours wore on, they continued to ask strangers, offering the car to anyone who would listen. People walked past, some offering pitying glances, others pretending not to see them at all. But nothing changed. Their hope was slowly slipping away when Blake Harrison, a powerful and successful CEO, walked by. Blake, in his custom-tailored suit, had built Harrison Industries into a technology empire, his name synonymous with innovation, leadership, and ruthless business success. But today, as he strolled through the park on his way to a meeting, he would unknowingly come face to face with a life-changing encounter. Blake was lost in his thoughts when he heard a small voice calling out to him. "Excuse me, sir, would you buy our car?" Blake stopped in his tracks, startled by the earnestness in the boy's voice. Turning, he saw the twins standing before him, holding out the toy car as though it were a precious artifact. There was something in their eyes, something raw and desperate, that made him pause. He had no idea why, but he felt an urge to stop. "How much?" Blake asked, his voice softer than he intended. The twins exchanged a quick glance, their faces full of uncertainty. "Whatever you can pay," Lucas said, his voice breaking. "We just need the money for our mom. She's really sick." Blake's heart sank as he looked at the car. Despite its age, it was still clean and carefully cared for, with small fingerprints where the boys had held it countless times. Something about their sincerity hit Blake deeply. Without thinking twice, he reached into his wallet and pulled out several bills more than they had ever hoped for. "Here," he said, handing them the money. "Will this help?" The boys looked at the money in shock. It was more than they had ever expected. Zach slowly handed the toy car to Blake, his fingers lingering for just a moment before letting go. "Thank you, sir," Lucas said, his voice full of relief. "This will help our mom a lot." Blake watched them hurry away, clutching the money tightly in their hands. He could have gone back to his day, but something inside him stirred. The interaction, brief as it was, had affected him more than he could have anticipated. He found himself looking after the boys, who were walking away, heads bent together in urgent conversation. Blake turned to his driver, who had been waiting at a distance. "Follow them," he said quietly, surprising even himself. "I want to see where they live." As Blake's car followed the twins through the city, his thoughts began to shift. For years, he had lived a life defined by wealth and success, isolated from personal connections. But now, for the first time, he felt a strong pull towards something different, something deeper. His life had been one of careful control and focus. But now, in the presence of these two boys, he felt an undeniable need to help. The car followed them to a dilapidated apartment building in one of the city's forgotten neighborhoods. The contrast between Blake's sleek car and the crumbling building could not have been more stark. As the twins disappeared inside, Blake sat motionless in the back seat, the toy car still in his hand. He couldn't help but feel that his carefully controlled life had just been disrupted in a way he had not anticipated. Blake climbed the stairs to their apartment, his mind racing. When he reached the door, the twins opened it, and Blake was greeted by the sight of their small, sparse home. In the corner of the room lay their mother, Catherine, pale and weak on a thin mattress. "How long has she been like this?" Blake asked softly. "Weeks," Zach answered, his voice full of concern. "She's getting worse every day." Blake knelt beside Catherine, gently touching her arm. "She needs to go to the hospital. he said firmly. "We don't have money," Lucas replied, his voice small. "That's why we were selling our car." Blake looked at the toy car in his hand, then at the boys' faces. Without hesitation, he stood up. "I'll take care of it," he said. "I'll get her the treatment she needs." The boys exchanged a look of surprise, but before they could say anything, Blake gently lifted Catherine into his arms and carried her down the stairs to his car. As he drove to the hospital, Blake realized that this moment was more than just helping a family in need. It was about something deeper, about healing parts of himself he had long forgotten. The act of kindness, of caring for another person, had unlocked a part of him that had been sealed off for years. Blake had been living in a fortress of success, but now, for the first time, he was truly living. The encounter with the twins had changed him in ways he couldn't yet fully comprehend. By helping them, Blake had not only saved their mother, but had also started to heal his own wounds. The toy car, which had seemed so insignificant at first, had become a symbol of new beginnings of hope, compassion, and the possibility of redemption. In the heart of Central Park on a chilly autumn morning, twin brothers Zach and Lucas Wilson sat side by side on a faded park bench. Between them rested a small, red toy car worn around the edges but still shining when the sun hit it just right. It wasn't just any toy to the boys. It was a symbol of their hope, the one thing they had left to sell to save their mother, Catherine. The twins had not eaten a proper meal in days, and their small stomachs were gnawing with hunger. Their mother lay ill in their small, run-down apartment, and without money for the medicine she desperately needed, the twins knew they had no other choice. They had to sell the toy car, despite the fact that it had been with them for years. Zach nervously turned the car in his hands, whispering, "Someone's got to want it." Lucas, his identical twin, nodded, his blue eyes scanning the crowd of busy people walking past them. The city seemed so indifferent to their pain. The world kept moving, but the twins' hearts were still, hoping for someone to notice them. The twins' stomachs rumbled with hunger, but they pushed those feelings aside. "We have to try," Lucas said with determination, his voice breaking slightly. They hadn't eaten since yesterday's meager breakfast, but their mother needed the money. The toy car, as simple as it was their only chance. "Excuse me, sir," Zach called to a businessman rushing past. "Would you buy our car? It's really special." But the man didn't even glance in their direction. The pattern continued for hours. People hurried past, offering pitying glances, others pretending they didn't see them at all. The boys exchanged worried looks, but neither of them gave up. They couldn't afford to. This was their only chance to get their mother the medicine she needed to survive. It wasn't until Blake Harrison, a successful CEO, entered the picture that their lives would change in ways they could never have predicted. Blake was a man who had built Harrison Industries into a global empire. At 42, he had everything: wealth, power, and prestige. His name was synonymous with success in the tech world, but also came with a cold, isolated existence. Blake was known for his business prowess, but as he walked through Central Park that morning, his mind was preoccupied with meetings and business deals. He hardly noticed the people around him until Zach's quiet voice cut through his thoughts. "Excuse me, sir, would you buy our car, please?" Blake stopped, momentarily thrown off track by the sincerity in the boy's voice. He turned to see the twins, their faces full of anxiety and hope, holding out the toy car as though it was something precious. Blake's heart tugged at the sight. He had no idea why, but something in their faces made him stop. "How much?" Blake asked, his voice softer than he expected. The twins exchanged a brief look, unsure how to respond. "Whatever you can pay," Lucas said quietly. "We just need the money for our mom. She's really sick." Blake's gaze lingered on the toy car. It was obvious the boys had taken great care of it. Despite its age, it was clean, with small fingerprints on the surface. There was a story in that car, one of love, of childhood, of a family struggling to survive. Something inside Blake stirred. Without thinking twice, he reached into his wallet and pulled out several large bills. He handed them over to the boys. "Here," Blake said. "Will this help?" The twins' eyes widened in shock as they looked at the money. It was more than they could have hoped for. Zach carefully placed the toy car in Blake's palm, his fingers lingering for just a moment before pulling away. "Thank you, sir," Lucas said, his voice shaking with emotion. "This will help our mom a lot." Blake stood there for a moment, watching as the twins hurried off, clutching the money in their hands. He could have gone back to his business, his meetings, but something about the encounter stuck with him. He found himself staring after them, wondering what had just happened. Without even thinking about it, Blake turned to his driver. "Follow them," he said, surprising himself with the command. "I want to see where they live." As Blake's car trailed the boys through the city, he couldn't help but feel an odd sense of urgency. For years, he had built his empire and carefully guarded his emotions. But something about this situation, these boys, their love for their mother, was beginning to pierce through his armor. The car followed the boys to a rundown apartment building in one of the city's forgotten neighborhoods. Blake's sleek, black vehicle stood in stark contrast to the crumbling surroundings. The boys disappeared into the building, and Blake sat motionless, the toy car still resting in his hand. His life had been about business, about wealth, but this moment made him question everything. Blake climbed the stairs of the building, his footsteps heavy with the weight of what he was about to do. When he reached the door, one of the boys opened it, his face full of confusion. Inside, Blake saw the small, sparsely furnished apartment. In the corner of the room lay their mother, Catherine, pale and frail on a thin mattress. "How long has she been like this?" Blake asked quietly. "Weeks," Zach replied, his voice thick with emotion. "She's getting worse every day." Blake knelt beside Catherine, gently touching her arm. "She needs to go to the hospital," Blake said decisively. "We don't have money," Lucas said, his voice barely above a whisper. Blake looked at the toy car, then at the twins' faces. Without thinking, he stood up. "I'll take care of it," he said firmly. "I'll get her the treatment she needs." The boys exchanged a glance of surprise, but Blake had already made his decision. Without waiting for their response, he carefully lifted Catherine into his arms and carried her to his car. As Blake drove to the hospital, his mind raced. The act of kindness he was offering to this family was something he hadn't anticipated, but he could feel that it was changing him in ways he couldn't explain. For the first time, Blake realized that his life was about more than just business and success. He had spent so long focused on building his empire that he had forgotten what it meant to truly care for others. But these twins, Zach and Lucas, had reminded him of the importance of love, of family, of human connection. And now, for the first time in years, Blake felt alive. On a crisp autumn morning in Central Park, twin brothers Zach and Lucas Wilson sat side by side on an old bench, their small hands clutching a weathered red toy car. It wasn't just any toy. This was their most cherished possession, something they had held onto through the hardest times. Yet today, it was the last thing they had left to sell. Their mother, Catherine, lay weak and sick in their cramped apartment, her condition worsening each day, but the twins had no money for her treatment. Their hunger gnawed at them, but they knew the priority was their mother's medicine. The boys hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, but the urgency of the situation pressed them forward. "Someone's got to want it," Zach whispered, his hands trembling slightly as he fiddled with the car. Lucas, his identical twin, nodded silently, his gaze fixed on the busy crowd passing by. It was a cool morning, and while the world around them seemed to rush on, the twins sat there in desperation, clinging to the hope that someone would stop and notice their plight. They hadn't planned on being here, on selling their prized possession, but with no other choice, they hoped someone would help them save their mother. They both had their eyes set on a businessman in a sharp suit. "Excuse me, sir," Zach called out, holding out the toy car. "Would you buy our car? It's really special." But the man walked past without a glance. This wasn't the first rejection they'd faced. People hurried by, absorbed in their own lives, their eyes intentionally avoiding the boys. Zach and Lucas exchanged worried glances, but refused to give up. Their mother needed the medicine, and they were willing to do anything to get it. "We need to try harder," Lucas said quietly, his voice cracking with emotion. The weight of their situation was heavy. They had no other option but to keep going. As they continued to plead with passers-by, nothing changed. The world moved on without them. It wasn't until Blake Harrison, a successful tech CEO, walked into their lives that everything would change. At 42, Blake had spent his career building Harrison Industries, a global technology empire. His days were filled with high-stakes meetings and financial dealings, but all of that seemed distant as he walked through the park that morning. He had his mind set on business, barely noticing the people around him. That was until he heard a small voice calling out, "Excuse me, sir, would you buy our car, please?" Blake stopped mid-stride, taken aback by the sincerity in the boy's voice. Looking down, he saw the twins standing before him, holding the toy car like it was the most precious thing in the world. There was something about their faces, full of desperation and hope, that made him pause. Without thinking, Blake turned toward them. "How much?" he asked, his voice softer than he expected. The boys exchanged a glance, unsure of what to say. "Whatever you can pay," Lucas answered, his voice small. "We just need the money for our mom. She's really sick." Blake's heart tugged at the sight. The car, though old, was clean and cared for. The small fingerprints left on it told a story of love, of a childhood bound to this one object. Blake found himself unexpectedly moved by their honesty. Reaching into his wallet, he pulled out several large bills, more than they had ever imagined. "Here," he said, extending the money. "Will this help?" The twins stared in shock, unable to believe their eyes. It was far more than they had hoped for. Zach carefully placed the toy car in Blake's palm, his small fingers lingering just for a moment before pulling away. "Thank you, sir," Lucas said, his voice trembling with relief. "This will help our mom a lot." Blake nodded, watching as the boys hurried off, clutching the money tightly in their hands. But something stopped him from returning to his usual routine. For reasons he couldn't quite explain, he felt compelled to follow the boys. He turned to his driver and, without hesitation, instructed, "Follow them." Blake's heart was unsettled as he watched the twins move through the streets. He had spent his entire life building walls, focused only on business and success. But now, something inside him stirred. It was more than just charity, it was a pull, a need to do something meaningful for these boys. The car followed the twins to a rundown apartment building in one of the city's poorer neighborhoods. Blake's car, sleek and expensive, stood in stark contrast to the crumbling surroundings. The boys disappeared inside, and Blake sat in his car, the toy car still in his hand, feeling a strange sense of urgency. He had never felt this way before. Blake climbed the stairs to the apartment, each step heavier than the last. When the door opened, Blake was greeted by the twins, their faces full of confusion. Inside, Blake saw Catherine, their mother, lying weak and pale on a thin mattress. "How long has she been like this?" Blake asked, his voice soft. "Weeks," Zach replied, his voice full of worry. "She gets worse every day." Blake knelt beside Catherine, his hand gently resting on her arm. "She needs to go to the hospital," Blake said firmly. "We don't have money," Lucas answered. "That's why we were selling our car." Blake looked at the toy car, then back at the twins' hopeful faces. Without thinking, he stood up. "I'll take care of it," he said, his voice decisive. "I'll get her the care she needs." The boys exchanged a glance of surprise, but before they could speak, Blake lifted Catherine in his arms and carried her down the stairs to his waiting car. As Blake drove Catherine and the twins to the hospital, he realized that this was more than just a kind gesture. He was changing in ways he never anticipated. For the first time in years, Blake felt connected to something more important than business. He was beginning to understand what it truly meant to care for others. This small act of kindness was the beginning of a transformation in Blake's life. No longer would he be solely defined by his business empire now. He was discovering what it meant to be human again. Through the eyes of these twins, Blake saw the world differently, realizing that success and wealth meant little without meaningful human connection. The toy car, which had once seemed like a small, insignificant object, now represented something far more significant. The beginning of a new chapter, one filled with compassion, understanding, and most importantly, family. In life, the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the most profound transformations. Blake Harrison, a successful CEO, found his carefully controlled world disrupted by the simple, desperate plea of two twin boys trying to save their mother. Their willingness to part with their most treasured possession, a toy car, to help her in her time of need shows the power of love, sacrifice, and family. Sometimes we may feel that our success or wealth is all that matters, but true fulfillment comes from human connection and selfless acts of kindness. Blake's decision to help the twins went beyond charity. It became a moment of personal awakening, where he rediscovered the value of compassion and emotional connection. The message here is that it's never too late to open your heart, to reach out to others in need, and to create meaningful bonds that enrich our lives. For those of us in our later years, it's a reminder that kindness and care never grow old, and that the moments we share with others are what truly define us. Life is about love, generosity, and understanding that sometimes it is the most unexpected connections that heal us the most. Thank you for watching. We hope this heartwarming story has inspired you. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends and family. Stay tuned to Stories TH for more incredible stories like this one.